Your position is a scholar of media, sports, popular culture. So when you're in that Racism 101 class and the students say, how the hell did this happen? How do you explain it?
How did we get here? In many ways, we've always been here. We've just had different chapters, different manifestation of the same history of inequality, of racism, of misogyny. And clearly our most immediate moment, we can see the current presidency as a backlash to the election of President Obama. You can see the backlash to demographic shift. You can see it as a backlash to cultural shifts. But yet, I also think oftentimes, whether we're talking about our current moment or the civil rights movement, that notion of the backlash, or what Michael Omi and Howard Winant in their important book, Racial Formation, will talk about, that out of the 1970s, you see the emergence of the new right and a racial retrenchment. I think sometimes we get stuck where we're normalizing and naturalizing that backlash, that response, that resistance, that it's understandable, that it's reflecting racial anxiety or all the different phrasing that we see. And in many ways, I think it's a continuation of hundreds of years. The importance of thinking of a continuity of history and yet seeing the particular moment, whether it be the power in terms of hyper-presence, but also the potential profit in spectacle. And spectacle surrounds us. And we just go from one moment to the next. And I think that's part of where we're at, the place of consumer culture, whether we're seeking change or seeking comfort or seeking quote-unquote normalcy, seeking community in reference to loneliness, is often comes back to consumption.
Why does Kaepernick matter? I know that's a huge question right now, but why does sports matter in this moment? Why does Cap matter in particular?
In many ways, he matters because he's a reminder. Sports are political. And so he matters in that he's this daily reminder that the notion of sports as apolitical, as simply, quote unquote, the opiate of the masses, or as leisure time, or any of the cliches, is just a lie. The fact that there is so much anger directed at him demonstrates the stakes, demonstrates the investment in sports as a particular political project, one where nationalism and militarism and where black bodies are required to, quote unquote, shut up and play. So there's an investment in that political project. And so I think he matters in that regard. He matters for, I think, many that seek out movements of justice because he's a reminder of the power and potential of sports as an instrument of change. Now, I would take a little exception at that narrative because I think we've reduced the revolt of the black athlete 2.0 to him. And then if we look at the history of WNBA players protesting, if we look at the history of college athletes protesting in recent years, and we look at the various ways, whether we're talking about University of Missouri, the strike, or more individual act, the mistake to reduce the movement to him. We have a tendency, or we're in some ways replicating much of history and reducing movement down to a single individual, usually a male, charismatic, who has a national spotlight on them. And so I think he's important because he also should be a reminder that movements are bigger than single individuals. Now, in the case of Kaepernick, of him kneeling about the persistent violence directed at the black community, about police violence, about systemic racism, about Flint, we need to push back at the efforts to reduce the movement to him, and about him kneeling, and about NFL players kneeling, to find, again, what the protest is about, because its significance is about the demand that Black Lives Matter, not just on the field, or not just in the university diversity brochure, and not just in evidence of national racial progress, but in the way that our institutions are arranged, in daily experiences when we're talking about inclusion and justice. And so I think he needs to be that reminder, even if sometimes I think we lose focus. We come back and get stuck in the movement being about protest and not what is being protested.
So let's say there's a well-intentioned, I always think people have the best of intentions, well-intentioned white brother or sister, and not just white brothers or sisters. Let's say a well-intentioned person who sees Kaepernick and, just as you echoed, says, well, I don't want to see this stuff. Keep the politics out of my sport. Why are you all doing this now? How would you respond to them?
Comforting, and it must be a wonderful place of privilege to see sports as apolitical. For that black athlete who who deals with racial slurs from the stands? Is it an apolitical space? For that young girl who wants to play sports but is denied access, who has to hear their parents or coaches talk to her or others with, you throw like a girl. It must be easy to think of it as not a political play. When we look at the mistreatment athletes, those playing sports around the globe, those who work in stadiums and build stadiums, it must be nice to think of it as this apolitical space. When we look at just countless examples, sports are political, whether it be the national anthem or that stealth bomber flying above, or the fact that look at coaches or general managers or athletic directors or press boxes overwhelmingly inhabited by white men, political. When we look at what sports get airtime, which athletes get airtime, how athletes are talked about differently, whereas Cam Newton, when he's celebrating, or Des Bryant is on the sidelines, riling up his teammates, are described as selfish. And
black athletes' natural instincts and are naturally athletic, and white athletes are cerebral.
The language demonstrates not only the politics, but the history of racism and racial politics that are embedded in sports culture. So the examples are endless. So I would say that at one level. And then at another level, I would say, so you want protests to happen in a place that isn't disruptive to your daily life. Where is that place? And when you tell me that place, my question would be, well, then when that protest happens in that place, will you support it? I mean, you hear people who say, I support the cause, but not the method or not the place. My question is, well, how do you